Singing star Karen Carpenter died today of an apparent heart attack at the age of 32. In the past, she had suffered from the weight loss condition known as anorexia nervosa.
Karen Carpenter's haunting voice captivated millions, but her tragic end has long been shrouded in unanswered questions. Some say it was simply illness. Others whisper of darker forces at play. What really happened to the beloved singer whose life seemed so perfect on the surface? Why do fresh revelations paint a far more chilling picture of betrayal, secrets, and a final truth that fans have waited decades to uncover? We're about to break down the hidden story behind Karen Carpenter's final days, a story that, until now, has been clouded by half-truths and speculation. Using new evidence, interviews, and insights from those closest to her, we'll explore what truly ended the life of a musical icon. A star born from struggle, Karen Ann Carpenter entered the world in New Haven, Connecticut. To the outside world, her childhood might have seemed typical, filled with the rhythms of mid-century American life. Yet behind the doors of the Carpenter household, the foundations of both her brilliance and her eventual heartbreak were quietly being laid. The youngest of two children, Karen grew up in the shadow of her older brother Richard, whose prodigious musical talent quickly became the focal point of their parents' ambitions. While Harold Carpenter, her father, was steady and reserved, it was Agnes Carpenter, Karen's mother, who shaped much of Karen's early world. Agnes was determined to see her children succeed, especially Richard, and her fierce drive often left Karen feeling like a supporting player in her own family. Karen was a naturally gifted child, though she didn't show much interest in music until the family relocated to Downey, California, when she was 13. The move was meant to provide Richard with greater opportunities, but it also placed Karen in an environment that would spark her own musical journey. She initially found solace in drumming, a surprise for a young girl at the time, and she excelled quickly, winning praise from teachers and classmates. Behind the drum kit, Karen felt powerful, hidden, and in control. As Paul McCartney once said of her, she had the best female voice in the world, melodic, tuneful, and distinctive. It was a space where the constant pressure to be perfect seemed to lift, even if just for a while. But it was her voice, soft, haunting, and impossibly pure, that soon drew the spotlight away from her drums and onto the stage where she could never hide. As Karen and Richard began performing together, first in small local gigs and later in recording studios, it became clear that they were destined for stardom. Yet, as the offers rolled in and the duo's career began to take flight, Karen's internal struggles also began to escalate. From an early age, she came to absorb that the unspoken truth within her family, among her industry peers, and in the wide world beyond, portrayed a direct relationship between her value and succeeding against expectations. What had initially propelled her to success began to emerge as a torment for her. Not a daughter, not an artist, not even a young woman in a physical world. These were the feelings with which Karen rarely weighed herself. The glittering smile and warm stage presence actually masked a girl who, for now, wanted to be enough just as she was. The childhood years formed the backdrop for almost every dimension of Karen's adult life. The compulsive striving to give pleasure, the conditioned fear of disappointing those she loved, and her desire to control what she could over a world which seemed to her mostly beyond her control, were all planted in her childhood. But while the fame of the Carpenters grew, Karen was drawing the lines into her war within. The image of the honey-voiced sweet girl hid deep cracks forming underneath. The more the world adored her, the more she felt herself slipping away, trying desperately to reconcile the girl she was with the star they all wanted her to be. The price of perfection would soon cost Karen more than anyone imagined, drawing her into a silent war few saw coming. The rise of a voice, As the 1960s gave way to the 1970s, Karen Carpenter's voice became the soundtrack of a generation. When the Carpenters broke through with hits like Close to You and We've Only Just Begun, their warm, melodic style felt like an antidote to the turbulence of the times. Karen's voice was different, pure, honest, unpretentious, and it connected with millions. Behind the scenes, the success was dizzying. The Carpenters weren't just chart toppers, they became symbols of wholesome American pop. Yet, while their records sold in the millions and their TV specials earned rave reviews, the image of Karen Carpenter as America's sweetheart masked a growing and painful truth. Fame had opened the door to new pressures, and with each new hit, the shadows in Karen's life deepened. The music industry, always quick to praise and quicker to criticize, began to shift its attention from Karen's voice to her appearance. Executives, producers, and even journalists commented on her weight, her looks, her stage presence, always with the underlying message that no matter how beautiful her voice, she could still be better. Karen, who already struggled with perfectionism, internalized these comments in ways no one fully realized at the time. Every photo shoot, every TV appearance, every concert became an exercise in self-critique. The gentle, self-deprecating humor she sometimes displayed in interviews masked a spiraling insecurity, one that soon took dangerous forms. Karen Carpenter's world, while enshrined in their songs, meant to project light and innocence, had increasingly been filled with gloom and loneliness, self-doubt creeping into the mind. She found herself almost isolated from the world by the demands of an unending schedule of tours, recording sessions, and appearances in the media. She didn't really have time to make more than perfunctory acquaintances outside of her immediate troupe, and even there, she often felt alienated. Family dynamics only made it worse. Karen loved Richard deeply, but their bond, so central to their success, also meant that Karen's needs would sometimes have to fall victim to that larger machine of the Carpenters. When Richard had his share of problems, a trip through addiction, Karen assumed the burden of keeping the duo's image spotless, no matter what it actually cost. The most tragic aspect of Karen's deterioration was how much it lacked visibility to the rest of the world. Fans admired her breathtaking performances and the way she glowed, always betokened with the gentle grace that encompassed her. Very few people knew of the ones that existed, that there was a private war going on behind the scenes for Karen. Dionne Warwick, who reminisced about an encounter in 1981, shared, "It was shocking to see how very thin she was." The same industry in which she took her highest accolades, one that made her talented, also beset her insecurities. Be thinner, prettier, more perfect. Until then, the way to please was an obsession without her knowing. In the end, Karen began to go on severe diets, thinking she could control the one thing that her self-critical voice would never let her know was sufficient. Friends and co-workers noticed her weight loss, but in an age when disordered eating were not well understood, few could comprehend the extent of it. As the hits kept coming, Karen's struggle became harder to hide, leading to choices that would shape her tragic fate. A marriage that wasn't a fairy tale. By the end of the 1970s, Karen Carpenter seemed to be searching for something that all the fame and fortune hadn't given her: love, stability, and perhaps a sense of normalcy. In 1980, she married real estate developer Thomas Burris, a man who, at first glance, appeared to offer everything she longed for. The wedding, held at the Beverly Hills Hotel, was lavish and widely covered by the media, painting a picture of a dream union between America's sweetheart and her supposed prince. For fans, it was a hopeful chapter, a sign that Karen might finally find personal happiness to match her professional success. But the reality behind the smiles and headlines was far from a fairy tale. From the beginning, there were signs that something wasn't right. Friends and family later described Burruss as controlling and emotionally distant, someone who seemed more enamored with the idea of being married to a celebrity than with Karen herself. Even during the marital proposal, it was meant to be a matter of encouragement and partnership for Karen, whose isolation increased. What finally broke her was the amalgamation of years of pressures: perfectionism, public scrutiny, and the impact of fame. The only thing she really wanted within the marriage was some type of emotional support. Instead, the man who was supposed to provide her with solace became a source of some pain. Besides the emotional distance, there were other facts that greatly troubled their relationship. She soon found out that Thomas had lied to her about some substantial matters in his life. One was his financial solvency. While she had entered the marriage trusting Thomas with thoughts about building a life together, she had found herself instead burdened with his debts and broken promises. Her friends became dismayed when Karen shared with them her accounts of rising tensions, unending fights, and a bruising sense of betrayal that was beginning to characterize her married life. The pressures of her personal life paralleled those of her career. She had a sound in her voice that was very unique, that I haven't heard before, Burt Bacharach once said, revealing the frailty that lent so powerful an edge to her art. Instead of bringing her into the light, the marriage seemed to cement her despair and drive Karen deeper into the darkness she had fought hard to escape. Karen tried as much as she could to keep the facade of a happy wife, just as she had tried all her life to keep that of the perfect star. She smiled for the cameras, gave interviews that painted a rosy picture, and played her part with requiem. But in the real world, she was coming apart at the seams. The emotional upheaval took on her already frail health. It got dangerously poor and got dangerously worse. The struggle with her already bad anorexia worsened, transformed from an attempt at gaining control to falling further into the quagmire as things in her personal world escalated into chaos. The marriage that she thought would save her turned into yet another cage, another source of hurt in her life, which she did not have a way to escape from. With the final one-liner of just 3 sentences, Karen, around 1 year past the wedding, filed for divorce, a decision that she felt, deep inside, had to be made, but also one that had defeated her sense of hope. Love, it was supposed, would give her peace. Now, it became another chapter of disappointment. All this had further delayed and softened her attempts to rebuild her life. Instead, Karen's declining health had already been compromised further by the very emotional scars carved by her catastrophic marriage. The girl with the golden voice was now fighting battles on every front, and the people who could have helped her seemed unable or unwilling to see just how much she was hurting. The heartbreak at home wasn't the only betrayal Karen would face. Dark forces in the background were about to surface. The final days. By the early 1980s, Karen Carpenter's once bright star seemed to dim, not because the world stopped loving her music, but because, behind the scenes, her spirit was breaking. She was now fighting battles on all fronts, personally, professionally, and, most alarmingly, physically. While the public still saw the charming, talented woman who could melt hearts with a single note, Karen's inner circle began to witness the terrifying toll her struggles were taking. The girl who once found strength behind a drum kit, who could light up a stage, was now grappling with a frail body weakened by years of self-punishment and emotional wounds that never seemed to heal. Even John Lennon once told her admiringly, "I want to tell you, love, that you've got a fabulous voice." Her battle with anorexia nervosa, a condition few understood at the time, had become life-threatening. Doctors pleaded with her to seek help, family members voiced their concern, and friends tried to intervene. But Karen was trapped in a cycle that felt impossible to break. There were moments of hope. brief hospital stays, consultations with specialists, attempts at recovery. But the underlying pain that fueled her disorder remained unaddressed. The pressures of fame, the heartbreak of her failed marriage, and the deep-seated insecurities that had followed her since childhood all combined to make true healing elusive. Even as she tried to gain weight and regain control, the damage had been done. Her body, so slight and fragile, was simply too worn down to keep up the fight. The last days of Karen were the most painful ones, which were mixed with the last hope. She had moved to stay with her parents to try familiar grounds to help him with the revival of his life, and was attuned to the therapy that was given to new music that was going on, hoping that it would mark a new beginning in her life, both personally and professionally. She even sought judicial finality by seeking a legal divorce from Thomas Burris, intending to close that bitter chapter and get going. Friends would later reminisce on how she seemed to have shone in those few weeks, chuckling more, envisioning brighter tomorrows, and making plans. For a moment, it was as if Karen Carpenter would indeed set new frontiers, as if the energy that sustained her through many achievements would rescue her even from the darkest chapter this had to offer. Yet that flicker of hope was colored by her body beginning to fail. Malnutrition over the years, plus the stress of rapid recovery, put enormous strain on her heart. Collapsing on the floor of her childhood home on February 4, 1983, a few weeks before her 33rd birthday, all efforts by paramedics and doctors failed to revive her. The official declaration of death was cardiac arrest due to complications from anorexia nervosa. The world was shocked. Friends, fans, and colleagues grappled with reconciling the image of the vibrant, talented person they knew with the tragic circumstances of her death. Just when it seemed Karen might break free, unseen hands may have ensured she never got the chance. The official story, Unraveled, Karen Carpenter's death, sent shockwaves through the music world and beyond. In the weeks and months that followed, tributes poured in from fellow artists, devastated fans, and media outlets struggling to make sense of the loss. But as the grief settled, another wave emerged, one filled with uncomfortable questions, painful truths, and scandalous revelations that many wished could have stayed hidden. Behind the polished image of the girl-next-door pop star was a web of secrecy, manipulation, and neglect that left people asking, how did it come to this? Director Todd Haynes, who portrayed her story through Superstar, explained, "My use of Barbies was as a subtext to a story about how women's bodies are commodified, and this incredibly heartbreaking story of a young woman suffering from anorexia nervosa. One of the first painful revelations came from within Karen's inner circle. Those closest to her began to speak more openly about the struggles she had endured, not just with anorexia, but with the pressures placed on her by those who claimed to love and protect her. Stories surfaced of relentless criticism about her weight, even from people she trusted most. Some pointed fingers at her management, others at the industry, and still others at her own family, where the drive for perfection sometimes seemed to overshadow Karen's well-being. Agnes Carpenter's name surfaced often in these conversations as friends revealed how deeply Karen longed for her mother's approval and how devastated she felt when that approval seemed tied to her appearance rather than her happiness. The scandal deepened when insiders described the role of the medical professionals who treated Karen. In the dark days before disordered eating were well understood, some doctors treated with apparent disregard for the harm inflicted by their interventions. Evidence suggests that medications to stimulate Karen's appetite or counteract her anxiety may have instead aggravated her heart condition. Hints of missed signs, of warnings unheeded, of a system that, until too late, failed to appreciate the very seriousness of Karen's condition, surfaced. With the revelations fueling public outrage, A questioning of how someone such beloved could suffer such a betrayal from those who should have salvaged their life ensued. Beside them stretched the legal drama over Karen's estate and the crash of her brief but disastrous marriage. The divorce settlement with Thomas Burris was signed shortly before her passing and became another controversial drag. Burris, already hated bitterly by Karen's friends and family, was accused by some of taking advantage of Karen's entire financial resources during their marriage. Documents and testimonies suggested that Burris took advantage of that generosity, leaving financial complications on top of emotional stress. Most of the legal battles were fought quite quietly afterward, but damage had been done to Burris's reputation, and that scandal became part of the tragic legacy that surrounded Karen's last years. For indeed, what had made the aftermath of Karen Carpenter's death so haunting was that, unfortunately, so much pain had been drawn out in clear view of the public. The industry that had to make so much fanfare over her voice had, of course, contributed to her downfall as well. A lot of people who professed to be close to and love her had, in some cases, exacerbated some of the very insecurities consuming her. All the revelations regarding scandals in the secret.pdf that surfaced after her death showed clearly how vulnerable she must have been and how easily her vulnerabilities were exploited. The questions surrounding Karen's death refused to fade, and soon, new investigations would reveal truths long buried. New evidence, a darker truth. For years, the tragedy of Karen Carpenter's death was seen as the heartbreaking result of a silent battle with anorexia nervosa, an illness misunderstood at the time and often overlooked until it was too late. But in the decades since, whispers, documents, and new investigations have suggested that the story may have been more complex and far darker than what the world was told. As new evidence surfaced, a troubling picture began to form, one that suggested Karen may have been failed not just by ignorance, but by those who were supposed to protect her. Journalists writing about Karen's life began collecting accounts which showed evidence of a pattern of exploitation and neglect behind the scenes. Some of the most horrifying accusations emerged from those who were close to Karen in her final years, friends, aides, even former colleagues, who described a young woman surrounded by people concerned only about her image and their profit. One set of medical records includes disturbing indications about the treatments Karen received, which in all likelihood hastened her decline. Reports suggested that treatments were instead prescribing things that would stimulate her appetite or settle her anxiety, all the while indirectly stressing what was already an overwhelmed heart. Upon further reflection, some of those treatments might well have been experimental at best, recklessly so at worst. The most chilling possibility was that Karen had been attempting to extricate herself from dismal, debilitating relationships and gain some control of her career and life in the months preceding her death. The letters and diary entries indicated that she was planning a fresh start, a new album, new management, and a better focus on her health. She had begun to look into legal avenues for removing from her life those who had harmed her emotionally and financially. For a moment in time, it appeared that Karen Carpenter could try and regain her life from the evil forces pulling her down. However, just as she seemed to summon the inner power for the fight against her premonition, her body gave out to leave behind endless, haunting questioning that may never find answers. The darker truth that emerged with time seems to be about the other sides to Karen's death, and about the system that made it happen. An industry that too often puts appearance before health, fame before humanity. There she was in their midst. A whole network of people failed her, all of whom could not see her as a person but as a commodity. Then the greater tragedy. While a gifted artist was being mourned by the world, there lay buried the other set of reasons for her avoidable death, which remains such because no one listened, saw and acted on her behalf while there was time. Behind the curtain of applause was a silence filled with missed chances and ignored warning signs. Karen's pain was hidden in plain sight, masked by smiles and stage lights, dismissed as part of the price of success. Her story exposes a haunting question: how many more must suffer before care outweighs profit, and humanity reclaims its place in the spotlight? The full scope of the betrayal Karen endured is only now coming into focus, and what it reveals is nothing short of heartbreaking. Legacy shattered and remembered. In the wake of Karen Carpenter's death and the painful truths that followed, her legacy became something far more complex than the world had once imagined. For years, Karen was celebrated purely as the angelic voice behind some of the most beloved songs in pop music history. A symbol of wholesome beauty, charm, and musical perfection. But as new evidence surfaced, revealing the betrayals, the neglect, and the exploitation she endured, that once untouchable legacy was both shattered and reshaped. Fans who had adored her for her music were now confronted with the reality of her suffering, forced to reconcile the image of Karen Carpenter, the star, with Karen Carpenter, the woman, vulnerable, silenced, and failed by the very people and systems that should have saved her. The revelations of what Karen endured didn't tarnish the love for her music. If anything, they deepened the respect and admiration fans felt for her. Now, when people listen to "Close to You" or "We've Only Just Begun," they don't just hear the pure, effortless vocals. They hear the strength of someone who was fighting for her life behind the scenes. They hear the heartbreak that was hidden behind every flawless performance. Her voice, once seen as soft and sweet, became a symbol of resilience in the face of unimaginable pressure. The innocence that people once projected onto Karen's image was replaced by something far more powerful: empathy. Karen's narrative has transformed and rekindled an endless discussion on mental sanity, body image, and the cost of fame, at times brutal. Documentaries, books, and investigative reports began not just probing her musical success, but also the darker angle within her journey as well. She became one of the most well-known faces of conversation in disordered eating, such an extreme representation of when such disorders can even hit those who seem to have it all. Advocacy groups and medical researchers would quote her case as the turning point to push for greater awareness, better options, and compassion toward those who are suffering in silence. The transformation that has been spurred by Karen's story has, however, not removed the shattering heartache. To Richard Carpenter, their family, and the fans who watched her rise and fall, that loss is heavy. It's a loss resulting not only from the music that Karen was never able to make, but also from the reflection of the happiness and peace she was never able to experience. The legacy that she left is one that was brilliant and beautiful, but also one of caution. It would remind the world that behind the brightest smiles could lie the depth of pain, and that fame offers no protection from the damages associated with unmet emotional needs or unchecked societal pressures. Today, Karen Carpenter is remembered as both a legend and a lesson. Her music continues to fill the airwaves, her voice as clear and moving as ever. Statues, memorials, and tributes pay homage to it, and generations of artists point to her as a source of inspiration. Yet under the elated accolade of her talent rests the sobering reminder of all that has been lost, the dreams never realized, the songs unheard, the life cut far too short. The legacy of Karen is the mosaic of triumph and tragedy, a story that resonates as it captures the complexity of human experience. Long after her final notes fade, the memory of Karen Carpenter lasts in songs. As Gail Levant, friend and harpist, reflected, the gift she gave us was her art, the voice in her heart. She didn't just sing the words, she lived them. She told the story. And for each ear that attaches to a Carpenter's record, a promise renews to see, to listen, and to remember the woman behind the music. Karen Carpenter's voice will always survive. It will be heard not just in song, but in those many vital conversations she started and that continue into silence. Her legacy moves beyond melody, echoing in mental health advocacy and the growing awareness of disordered eating. Each time her story is revisited, it brings both comfort and caution, a reminder of the costs of fame and the fragility of life. In this way, Karen Carpenter becomes not just a voice of the past, but a presence in the present, urging compassion, care, and change. If Karen Carpenter's story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts on what you believe truly happened, and check out the next video on your screen for more untold truths behind music's biggest legends.